I'm Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an exciting program. For those who are new to the Alliance, we're a member-supported advocacy organization. We strive to be the best source of information on what high-speed rail is, what regional rail is, why we need to build them, and what steps can be taken in order to make that happen. And we provide you with some of the tools you need in order to educate your state leaders and your federal leaders and ask them to make it a reality here in the States. I have a particular affection for the Shinkansen, or the bullet train in Japan, in part because I was born just 1 month before it started launching or started running. So I was born September 2nd, and the train started running in October, which means I'm getting to be 60. But it's really exciting, and it caused a revolution across the world, which means that we have high-speed rail now. And it's easy to think, like with, I think many Americans think that the interstate highways just came here through some divine intervention. It's easy to think that Japan just, of course, it has bullet trains, but it wasn't an of course issue in the late 50s and early 60s. And so I was very excited to run across Jessamyn's book about the early days of the Shinkansen, and I'm glad that she's here to talk with us today. Chris, if you could provide the more formal introduction.
Sure, thank you. I'm Chris Ott, Deputy Director here at the High Speed Rail Alliance. Thank you all for being here, and it's great to have Professor Jessamyn Abel, with us here today. We've been working on this for a couple of months, and it's always great when it comes together. Jessamyn R. Abel is Associate Professor in the Asian Studies Department and affiliated faculty of the School of International Affairs at Pennsylvania State University. She is a historian of modern Japan with interests in democratization, technology, infrastructure, sports, and international relations. Her recently published book, Dream Super Express, A Cultural History of the World's First Bullet Train, views the 1960s through the window of the Tōkaidō Shinkansen, showing how infrastructure operates beyond its intended use as a means of transportation to perform cultural and sociological functions. Her first book, The International Minimum, Creativity and Contradiction in Japan's Global Engagement, 1933 to 1964, examines the trans-war development of Japanese internationalism. She has also published on the Information Society, the Olympics, cultural diplomacy, textbooks, and even the history of whaling in the 19th and 20th centuries. Her current research focuses on post-war Japan to examine the role of public institutions in shaping democracy by promoting understandings of democratic thought and practice. For members of our audience today, thank you again for being here. If you have a comment, please put that in the chat. And if you have a question, please use Zoom's Q&A feature. That helps us to keep things organized and get to as many questions as we can after the presentation. And with that, Professor Abel, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for, first of all, inviting me to come and share my work. I'm very excited about that. It's a different kind of audience than I usually get, so I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for being here and for coming and hearing me talk about Japan's high-speed rail, one of my favorite topics. As you can tell from the book cover that I have showing up here, the title of the book, Dream Super Express, comes from a phrase that was often used to talk about the new Tōkaidō line, the world's first bullet train, when it opened in October 1964. It was the world's fastest train, and as the world's fastest, it really captured people's imaginations, both in Japan and elsewhere, all around the world. And because of that symbolic power, it has been called the symbol of Japan, or the symbol of modern Japan. Here in this image, fairly recently by JR Central Japan Rail, one of the Japan Rail regional companies, as you can see, promoting the Shinkansen to an international audience. And so I've read so many times and heard so many times the bullet train referred to as a symbol of Japan that my question when I started this research was, why? Why did the bullet train become such a powerful symbol? And the answer that I found as I did this work and over the course of writing this book was that it became a powerful symbol because people were able to fill it with meanings that really mattered to them. And so the bullet train came to embody the nation, the community, even the self, in some cases, in different ways for different people. And because of that, it really came to be something that can represent important trends of the 1960s as a cultural history. And so that is my approach to understanding high-speed rail in Japan, is that I am a historian, and so I'm thinking of it not in terms of the technology of it per se, or the economics of it, but really what did it mean to people? I should also say I'm not an expert on U.S. rail, either historical or contemporary, aside from a couple of years commuting on New Jersey Transit, which well, left me with not a really well, let's set NJ Transit aside. Never mind. So I will be relying on you to make connections to between the American case and this Japanese historical example that I'm going to be talking about. And my main question for today is about the impact of the anticipation and early use of the bullet train on the urban geography of the Tōkaidō region, that is to say the region between Tokyo and Osaka that the line covers, between those cities and the spaces in between. And I'm talking about space really in terms of sort of three binaries, and they're rough binaries, of course. These categories can have porous boundaries and can merge into each other, but as a structure for understanding the impact of the bullet train on space, I've found them very useful. So let me just briefly introduce them. One of those binaries is between physical and conceptual space. So physical space, not just the tracks and stations, but also sort of the ripple effects on urban development and the shape of the cities that had bullet train stops due to new patterns of movement. So how new patterns of mobility reshaped cities and helped them either grow or in some cases decline. So that's physical space, but conceptual space relates to the social construction of space, which is to say what people thought about the bullet train cities and the relationships between them, and also how people used the urban and regional space. So it's more about using the space and thinking about it rather than the physicality of the space itself. The second binary, I think, is a little easier to understand between urban and rural space. Of course, the bullet train stops were mostly in cities. There was one, Gifu-Hashima Station was placed in a space that did not have a large city. But of course, it cut through a lot of rural spaces, and therefore those spaces were very strongly affected as well. And then finally, the third binary, local space, both cities and towns and local villages, but also that region, the larger region of the entire Tōkaidō from Tokyo to Osaka. The bullet train created novel spaces within cities, but it also inspired new ideas about the cities that were connected by this new line and their residents and how they related to each other. The bullet train was incorporated into official plans for purposeful development of not only Tokyo, but other cities, but especially with regard to Tokyo. The idea that the bullet train would be incorporated into very, very careful planning was in contrast to haphazard rebuilding that took place in the very desperate moments in the wake of the 1923 earthquake, which destroyed much of Tokyo, and also the wake of the World War II fire bombings. And so there was a sense that that earlier unguided reconstruction had brought about this flawed city that was very rapidly becoming paralyzed by its own growth. So planners felt a need to rethink the fundamental structures of Japan's cities and also the connections between them. On the other hand, the bullet train also highlighted the conflict between two goals. On the one hand, the goal of industrial and economic development and growth. On the other hand, the desire for cultural and environmental preservation. And so there was this really fundamental schism emerging in Japan in the context of accelerating economic growth beginning in the late 1950s, as well as expanding urban sprawl, especially in Tokyo. After the line was built, the social reimagination of the space continued. This happened in government land development plans. It happened in academic treatments of urban planning. It happened in representation of the train through cultural products. And it happened through the combined movements of millions of people who were using the train or planning their trips on the train. So let me begin with physical spaces. As any large infrastructure, the bullet train reshaped urban spaces. And in Japan, this happened within a decades-long trend toward urbanization. So new stations and platforms and tracks destroyed spaces, but they also created new ones. I'm showing you one example here in this image of Kyoto Station that was in the process of expansion to accommodate the new bullet train platform. This was very much a site of protest as the expansion of the existing station into residential and shopping district south of the station required evictions from homes and businesses. So that was one example of a change in spatial usage, that these homes and businesses had to be moved elsewhere to accommodate this expanded space. In other places, such as Yakatacho here, which is just on the eastern margin of the city by the Kamo River, the Kyoto leadership's desire to beautify and modernize the city to with an eye toward the anticipated increase in tourism, especially foreign tourism, led to the destruction of other communities like this one that was deemed an eyesore and too much in contrast with sort of the beauty of the bullet train. They didn't want people riding this very sleek, modern form of transportation into what they wanted to celebrate as a modern and combination modern and ancient city, the ancient capital in a beautiful modern space. And they thought that contrast between this sort of slum area and the beautiful train was too jarring. And so they wanted to get rid of those types of communities. And that, of course, is not there anymore today. The site of some of the earliest murmurs of local opposition in Kyoto, Rokuson Shrine, as you can see, is now in the shadow of these constantly passing trains back and forth. In another part of Kyoto, back to the eastern edge here, you can see these are the bullet train tracks on the right here, and the regular train on the left, the one that actually has a train on it, that is not a bullet train. You can see they're quite close together as they come into the city over the Kamo River, but they gradually move apart a little bit as they approach the station. And so that created what you can see here, what people called at the time a pocket area. And this was an area that was deemed too small to really make any useful, have for any functional use. And here there is some function. This is one of the larger sections, and you can see there are these very low, small apartment buildings, and just beyond those, there's a temple that stayed there between the tracks. And you can see this is the bullet train track on the elevated tracks, and down just behind these trees here on the left side of the screen is the pre-existing track. And so those pocket areas were a new type of area that was formed by the train, not a very useful one, and one that people were very strongly opposed to at the time. If we turn our attention to Tokyo, the train also prompted new uses, and one of the main effects of bullet train construction was the creation of a layered city. One of Japan's most famous architects of the time, Tange Kenzo, stated in some of his plans for restructuring the city, plans that were very ambitious and never realized, but had an influence in many ways. He stated, "Mobility determines the structure of the city." This was a moment when Tokyo's population was nearing 10 million, and that was seen as a major major moment. That size of population and the ability of those people to speed to and from Nagoya and Kyoto and Osaka, not only in trains, but also there was a growing number of cars on an expanding system of expressways. That mobility, Tange said, was a determining factor for the shape of the city, and it certainly was for urban planners in their visions of the future of the city. The bullet train in Tokyo propelled, therefore, a layering of central Tokyo through the construction of elevated tracks above the existing cityscape and underground passageways and shopping areas below. And one of the greatest examples of this is Tokyo Station, which was the end point of the Tōkaidō line. So, for example, the shopping area of Tokyo Station, even before the bullet train arrived, was a point of congestion. And so that was moved underground, and then it steadily expanded until, if you go there today, it's almost another city under the city, and you can get completely lost underneath Tokyo Station. In another example, the head of bullet train construction in Tokyo gave an example of what he called Sushi Shop Alley in Yurakucho, as a neighborhood, one example of a neighborhood that was really crowded with businesses. Let me get you a picture of that. That put tight constraints on both the path that the line would take out of the city and on the construction process. So here is that neighborhood, Yurakucho. You can see in the left-hand picture as construction is underway. The tracks going up there next to the existing train line are covering over this street that where all of these restaurants are. And then in the picture on the right, you can see it's completely covered over, right? There's no street there anymore. It's more like a tunnel. But the tracks, as I said earlier, also spurred new uses of space and created novel relationships between local populations and transportation infrastructure. And so this is Yurakucho more recently, and you can see here, as in other crowded areas, the bullet train now runs over long strings of small pubs and restaurants and bars tucked into the space beneath the tracks. And if you go to Tokyo, I strongly recommend a visit to one of these areas. It's a lot of fun to spend an evening eating and drinking below the bullet train tracks. Another way that the bullet train affected physical space was the pull of bullet train stations where they were located outside of existing urban centers. So not only Gifuhashima, where there was not a large city at all, but more to the point, in Yokohama and Osaka both, the bullet train station was located on the margins of the city. And so the station sort of pulled the city outward to create new city centers. And here you have you can see in the example, Shin Yokohama or New Yokohama Station, which was placed far outside of the urban area in the middle of a wide stretch of paddy fields. And I have the dialogue I have up there right now is a discussion. It's from a long discussion among government and railway officials who were riding on a test train soon before opening. And just as they went, commenting on various operational details of the line, difficulties related to construction. They were very chatty all along. But as they neared New Yokohama Station, these rather talkative officials suddenly find themselves with very little to say. And the head of Japanese National Railway's construction department, Nisugi Iwao, introduces this rather surprisingly green space to an incredulous head of the Ministry of Construction Roads Department, Onouchi Yukio, and then Nagoya Mayor Sugito Kiyoshi, who compares the location to Hashima, that aforementioned site of the only bullet train station built where there was not a significant city. So I'll just go through this. Nisugi says, "This station in the middle of paddy fields is New Yokohama Station. There's nothing here, is there? Yeah, there's nothing here. It's like Hashima, isn't it? Is this the station for Yokohama?" So this incongruity of having a major high-speed railway station in a space that is devoid of roads and buildings was quite remarkable to people who were used to thinking of stations as very busy, bustling areas in city centers. But let's look at the picture for a moment. Contrary to these repeated claims that there was nothing here, it is, of course, in the midst of cultivated land, right? So there is something there. That agricultural character would very soon be changed by the force of the bullet train station. So you can see this is a more recent picture of the same station on the right there. From the perspective of urban economic growth, those productive paddy fields looked like nothing, but they were really being transformed discursively, in a sense, into an empty space for development. From the perspective of development, that space was empty, right? And it becomes filled with this, a new sort of inland center of what was the port city of Yokohama. It still was a port city, but now it had this new inland center. There was a similar process, as I mentioned, in Osaka. That location was not as rural as the one in Yokohama, so the change was less stark, but similarly, the city did kind of get pulled out to encompass that new station area. Moving outwards to a regional perspective, this is a map of the entire stretch from Tokyo to Osaka. The imagined space of the line was reshaped by the collective actions and plans and outlooks of millions of riders and potential riders. In addition, the presence of the train itself, speeding across the landscape, right? Whisking people from city to city. That made a difference in how people used the space, how they viewed the spaces that it ran through or connected or divided. So you can see that the bullet train reshaped mobility by facilitating some lines of movement and discouraging others. And that reshaping of mobility itself reshaped the social construction, that conceptual space of the bullet train. An important factor for the Tōkaidō region and the relationship between the Tōkaidō cities was the new possibility of traveling between Tokyo and Osaka, Japan's two largest cities, in only 3 hours on the line's fastest running train, the Hikari Super Express. That was at the time. Now there's a faster one. The Hikari was the fastest at the time. That changed both patterns of mobility and the popular imagine of the space of the Tōkaidō region. So when the train opened, even before it opened, but after it opened, people got a chance to ride the train, and it became a very popular thing to write about. especially for writers who were publishing in sort of general interest magazines. They would take a ride on the train and then tell people how they felt about it. So these public musings about the new accessibility between Tokyo and Osaka helped to change contemporary senses of distance and difference. So it transformed a national space that had been composed of very culturally distinct regions into one that was becoming steadily smaller and increasingly homogenized culturally, one that was becoming very densely packed urban nodes that were both characterized and linked by high-tech infrastructures. So let me give you a few examples. One example in which you can see this is the comments of novelist and Osaka native Tanabe Seiko about her bullet train ride to the East Peninsula. And she describes her trip and how she felt about it and what she did. And it reflects this kind of dwindling sense of distance and difference from the point of view of the Kansai region, that is the area around Osaka and Kyoto. And Tanabe writes, I don't know much about the eastern provinces. Within the Kansai sensibility, ours is the land of the imperial palace. And even one step beyond the area of the ancient capital are places that we think of as barbarian provinces. We stubbornly maintain images that float up from old names like Totomi, Suruga, Kai, Izu, Sagami, all of which we think of as distant lands. But with the appearance of the bullet train, from a paper journey via the timetable, suddenly Eastern Japan has ceased to be a distant land. So by referring to Kansai's history as the home of the imperial court until the emperor's 1868 move to Tokyo, and by using these kind of archaic names for the places between Osaka and Tokyo, Tanabe suggests that the distance of those places is also a thing of the past, right? They're not distant anymore. And what's more, she suggests that people don't even have to board the train to feel the closeness of those formerly distant lands, but rather they just have to take a paper journey via the timetable, as she puts it. Just knowing how quickly one could get there was enough to make those spaces feel closer. And so Tanabe sounds pretty happy about this, but not everyone was so enthusiastic. For instance, the author Kajiyama Toshiyuki, who at the time was already well known for his detective novel about corruption in land acquisition for the bullet train, recounted a conversation he had had on the Super Express with a businessman who was very excited that the region was becoming, as he put it, one huge Tōkaidō megalopolis. And Kajiyama did not quite share his enthusiasm, and he launched a defense against the danger of homogenization on behalf of his beloved Osaka. He wasn't from Osaka, but he loved the city. And he praised the particular charms of Osaka, the food, the people, the particular way of speaking, the dialect. And he warned, I do not want Osaka to become Tokyoized. I want Osaka to always be Osaka. Tokyo is like a colony, so it's all right if it doesn't have its own Tokyo scent. But Osaka, same as Kyoto, should have its own local scent. I would like to have some essence of Osaka left remaining. If not, I don't understand why one would go to Osaka. I would like for Osaka to have things Tokyo does not have. When I get off the bullet train and take the subway to Umeda, I want to find a city that is liberally sprinkled with the scent of Osaka. So he's not really specific what he means about Tokyo being like a colony, but if a colony is one that is kind of taken over by a foreign culture, then if, in the case of Tokyo, that culture is American culture. So if Japan is inundated with Americanized Tokyo culture, then Kajiyama was concerned that that would mean that they were losing that authentic local Japan that could still be found in places like Osaka. The bullet train was also taken up as a theme in many forms of popular culture. This helped to give meanings to the space of the line in ways that was connected to various tensions in contemporary Japanese society. For example, that tension between development and preservation that I mentioned at the start. This is important in part because most opposition to the bullet train didn't really reach the public eye through the news. Most people were getting sort of the promotional Japanese National Railways message of this is a wonderful thing for Japan and represents our achievements in technology, blah, blah, blah. But not many protests were big enough or strong enough, prominent enough to really make the national news. So people weren't really hearing that side of the story. However, that kind of opposition was entering the public consciousness through fictionalized accounts that were presented to popular audiences through a wide range of media, print, film, television, and by putting opposition into the form of emotional narratives that were presented, at least in the cases of film and television, through these very good-looking actors, sometimes in color. The popular cultural treatments of these stories not only reached a broad national audience, but also elicited a very strong gut reaction. So it's important to consider the impact of these materials on the popular views of the bullet train and its significance for the nation. So for instance, I already mentioned Kajiyama's detective novel highlighting a real case of corruption. So people might not have read the news of this corruption case, but a lot of people read the novel. It was a best-selling novel. In the following year, they made it into a movie that a lot of people saw by a major studio. So this was a story that was definitely coming to people's attention. So they were aware, even if it was just in the form of a fictional story that they maybe understood was based on a real story, there was this sense of a sort of a negative underside of the bright shining story of the bullet train. The one I have pictured here, this is Gamera, the Giant Monster, a 1965 monster movie, of course, a la Godzilla. And in this movie, the bullet train plays a very small role. It's just one of several symbols of Japan's post-war development alongside the Diet Building on the right side of the poster and Tokyo Tower on the left, which had just been built in 1958. And in this film, the bullet train is just part of a very wide swath of Tokyo that gets destroyed by this ancient creature that has been awakened by a nuclear explosion. And so it's very much representing that tension, that battle between the ancient past and Japan's modern present and urban development. Maybe perhaps more to the point is a television drama called Bullet Train, literally in Japanese, Dangan Resha, that aired on Japan's national broadcasting station, NHK, just before the bullet train opened. So over about 8 months, I think, before the first opening ride on the train. And this drama contained 10 episodes, mostly critiquing various aspects of planning and construction and eventually operation of the train. In every episode, in one case a double episode, by the end, those problems had been resolved. But still, having a TV show about them was bringing them to the attention of a large viewing public, right? They were bringing to their attention the existence of these sorts of downsides. So for instance, there's one episode titled Station Amid the Rice Paddies that is set in Hashima and directly confronts the difficulties and tensions surrounding land acquisition. So it's a story of two friends, one of whom gives in to pressure to sell his land that is going to be near the planned station because he's being offered so much money by developers. And after a few bad decisions, he ends up broke and landless, whereas his friend who resisted that pressure still has his family farm. He hasn't struck it rich, but he's still continuing his life as a farmer. Another episode told a story of some dishonest land brokers taking advantage of bullet train construction to make fast money through land speculation. A third focuses on the construction of a tunnel for the bullet train through a mountain that local legend said housed a pair of dragons who protected the nearby Mikan orange farms and kept them healthy and productive even in times of drought. So that legend, according to the television show, derived from the presence of an underground aquifer, which local leaders feared would be damaged by bullet train construction. So you can see from the start where this story is going. Of course, the bullet train tunnel floods, the wells in the area all dry up. There's tremendous fear about the future of the orange industry, and Japanese National Railways in the end saves the day by trucking in water, and the town comes together to put sandbags up to stop the leaking aquifer. So there's some sort of resolution here, but still it leaves kind of an uneasy feeling about rapid construction. Is it going too fast? If we had slowed it down a little bit and taken more care, could we have protected this natural resource? Importantly, all of these stories are based on real events. The orange industry of Shizuoka, in fact, has been holding up construction of the new maglev line that is being built right now because the governor of Shizuoka Prefecture would not allow construction. Now that governor recently resigned, and just a month ago, a new governor was elected who is reportedly more in favor of the maglev. So we have yet to see how this story plays out in the coming months. And with that, I'm going to end my talk, and I look forward to hearing comments and questions from all of you.
Thank you. I'm frustrated because that last image you had reminded me I wanted to go see the first Godzilla movie on the big screen, and it was only one night and I missed it. There's an important thing here. If we could go back in people's memories to the potential routes, and Kyoto, as I understand, both had to first fight to get the train to go to Kyoto, and then there was some issues of, well, can we get you to do something now that you've agreed to come to Kyoto? And then how does that relate to the tollway that was being built at the same time?
Well, that's actually a quite complicated question. Let me, I have a smaller map of, more zoomed in map of that. Yeah, so you can see here there are three different routes that are being considered for this path from Nagoya to Osaka Station. And two of them were rejected early on due to the quality of the land was not sufficient to support high-speed rail. So they ultimately, well, not ultimately, penultimately, in 1959, made this dotted line plan. But as you can see, even that passes well south of Kyoto. And so, yeah, leaders in Kyoto were very concerned that they were going to miss out, that the bullet train was going to pass them by, and that Kyoto was going to become sort of a second-rate city, that people weren't going to take the trouble to take the bullet train to Osaka and then get on a different train to come back to Kyoto, even though it's fairly close. And so, as you said, they campaigned very hard to get it, and sort of suggested that the city would take care of a lot of the construction around the station that would have to take place once JR agreed to go not down here, but actually right, this is the actual path they ended up taking. So going right through the existing Kyoto station, which itself is at the southern end sort of margin of the city, or was the margin at the time. It's grown a little bit southward since then. So they did bring it to the existing Kyoto station, but as I showed you in that image above, it involved a lot of construction around the city. And as soon as the Japanese National Railways agreed to come through the city, the local administrations sort of started digging in their heels and saying, well, you should really pay for this, that, and the other thing. JNR had an ace in their up their sleeve, which was that they said, okay, fine, you're getting a station, but it's only going to be one that stops on the slower train. You're not getting a super express. So the super express, that 3-hour train, they said is going to stop it's going to leave Tokyo, it's going to stop in Nagoya, and then it's going directly from there to Osaka. And so they used that as a pressure to make the Kyoto officials sort of make good on their agreement to pay for certain external and auxiliary projects. So it was really in the last minute, maybe about I can't remember the exact time frame, but a few months before opening, that 2 months before opening, I think, that the decision was made that this is going to be a stop on the Super Express.
And again, like, my statement at the beginning where it seems obvious, right? Of course, it just happened. But if you go to Kyoto today and that station that JR Central has built, it's almost a city unto itself. That wouldn't exist if it weren't for this successful political fight.
Yeah.
Way back when.
Yeah.
And Kyoto might not have been the place that you saw the monkeys during the Olympics. But how does the toll road fit into this? Because there is a belief, it's not in your book, but there was a lot. It wasn't determined that they were going to do a bullet train. And the country really was focused on car infrastructure. And they did have a toll road under construction while this was happening.
Yes.
So I'm not asking a very good question, but how do those two relate?
That is a very good question, actually, because there's a strong relationship between them. These were not really seen as competitors. They were two parts of the same process, really, which is that there was a bottleneck, right? The Tōkaidō region was the most densely populated, the most heavily industrialized. So a huge percentage of Japan's shipping was going through that region. A huge percentage of Japanese National Railways passengers and goods were going along those tracks. And so they were just really operating right at capacity and had to do something. So the expressways are part of that. So building new high-speed roadways was certainly part of that. The car industry was taking off at the time. And so that is certainly related. And the expressways probably would not have been enough. Japanese National Railways certainly felt they needed to do something. And so there were various options put forward. One was adding yet another track to the existing Tōkaidō line. They ultimately, out of the various options they discussed, decided a new wide gauge high-speed rail was going to be the best, most efficient, most effective choice. And so it was definitely seen as partnering with the expressways to clear up this bottleneck. At the same time, both were part of this kind of idea of Japan as an infrastructure kingdom, right? An infrastructural leader. There were new vacation travel packages being promoted by the tourist agency, Japan Travel Bureau, that were sort of highlighting these new infrastructural transportation infrastructures. So for instance, you could get on a bullet train in Tokyo and go see the gardens in Kyoto and then get on a high-speed bus back to Tokyo. Or you could begin in Osaka and take the expressway to Tokyo, where you could then go on the monorail, which had just been built, and then see some of the Olympic infrastructure and the Olympic Stadium and other things, and then take the bullet train back, right? So it was this circuit that you could do to like experience all of this great new infrastructure. So it was really part of the experience of tourism. There was seen as some competition with airplanes.
Can you tell me more about that?
There was some discussion of we have to make sure that it's not more expensive than airplanes, because we want to, it's roughly not the same amount of time, but by the time you like get out to Haneda Airport is not as far out as Narita, but once you get to Haneda Airport and then get where you're going and the airport that you're going to and into whatever city from there, you want to make sure that that direct line from Tokyo Station to Osaka Station or Kyoto Station is still a better choice than flying from Haneda to Kansai. And the airlines were concerned about that too.
Were they were concerned that they would take traffic away?
Yes.
Okay. I wonder if they did, or if it grew the market because the cities were able to grow as fast. But
I think probably the latter. I don't have the statistics on how airline travel did, unfortunately.
I know I'm going to slaughter the name
Fukuoka.
Yeah, I was surprised the last visit I had to Japan. Somebody suggested, well, it's too long to take the train. You should fly. But I'm like, no, there's a bullet train and it's only 5 hours. I want to take the train. And there was one more question, but I can't remember. Chris, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. Let's see. Thomas asks, was anything done to help low-income communities pushed out for railway expansions, or were they left without assistance from the government in relocating?
Well, that's a very complicated story. I spent many pages of the book talking about it. An entire summer of my life reading all the city assembly notes from the period. So yes and no. There was some receptivity to local protests. The case that I've looked at most closely in with regard to this question is Kyoto. I've looked a little bit at, there were some protests in Gifu Prefecture, which is the small insert that I put onto this map. So here, this is one, in this insert is one example of the protests, and Kyoto are the other one, is the other one. So in Gifu, the protests were more about trying to attract the station than repel it. So actually, I'll just focus on Kyoto in my answer. There, it was really economically and politically the most marginalized people, predictably, who were affected. The people who lived just south of the station were quite poor. Many of them were of either Korean descent, who were subject to quite a lot of discrimination, or they were the sort of the Burakumin community, these descendants of former outcasts who are still subject to discrimination. And they didn't get much assistance. The people in the assembly at some point met and said, okay, we're getting all these protests, petitions, written petitions, people coming in and complaining after the initial proposal, that November 1959 proposal. And so just soon or March 1959, sorry, just soon after that, people started filing these petitions and protests. And so the city assembly had a meeting in which they said, okay, every political group in the assembly should give a statement on how they want to react to this. And they all more or less said the same thing, which is, you know what, we really want to have this station here, so let's not make too big a deal about it. Maybe we can let Japanese National Railways know that there are some protests, give them the gist of it. But as one politician put it, do we really want to throw ourselves in the fire over this? Right? It's kind of like we're so close to getting what we want. Like, let's not rock the boat. So initially, they were sort of letting people deal with things themselves. As some very difficult negotiations sort of stretched on and on, they did jump in to serve as a mediator in some cases between local groups and JNR. There was one case that I found that where they really responded to local petition, and that is along the western side of the city. The city assembly had already planned kind of a industrial row there, and the bullet train path was going to go right through that. So local businesses said, hey, can you move the tracks just a few meters that away? And the politicians were really behind that because that sort of fit with their own plans. And they said, yes, please, railway, please move it a few meters that away. And that one seems to have succeeded. But other than that, people were more or less on their own.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I remember when we planned this talk that we agreed to focus in on just a part of your book. So thank you for giving us a little bit more there. Moving on, you said a bit about the uneasy feelings that construction caused, such as what we saw reflected in some of the monster movies that you showed us the posters for, and as well as Kyoto's efforts to be included. But could you say more about that? Nick asks, how did people in areas of Japan that were further away, far away from the Tōkaidō region react to the first Shinkansen? Was there hesitation and concern, or did they look forward to the arrival of it in their regions?
Well, it's sort of a difficult question to answer because I don't have a lot of evidence for people who weren't right there talking about it immediately. So to the extent that people wrote about it, of course, I'm relying on written records. It was 60 years ago. Yeah, people who would remember writing it, they're around, but mostly I was relying on written records. Yeah, so I don't really know what people who weren't directly involved with it, or at least thinking about writing on it, thought about it. What I do know is that very soon afterwards, the railway agencies started making plans for expansion, right? So they were going to expand it first along the Sanyo line, continuing westward out of Osaka. And then later they planned some lines heading northward from Tokyo. Eventually, by the early 1970s, the Japanese Prime Minister had voiced a desire to have the entire Japanese archipelago within 1 day's travel on high-speed rail. And he didn't get it because then there was the oil crisis, and the Japanese economy, along with much of the rest of the world, ran into some trouble. And so there was a bit of a pause on bullet train building, but they have finally gotten there today at any rate. So there was a sense, at least among people, and I should say that Prime Minister Tanaka Kakoe, he was from Niigata, which was one of those very distant places. And his idea was, this is going to be great for Japan to have bullet trains going everywhere, because right now everybody wants to be in the center. Everyone wants to be in Tokyo or Osaka, and nobody wants to stay in Niigata, which is my home district. He's thinking, right? Like, these people who are voting for me would like a bullet train. And so that does give you a sense that there was a constituency that was kind of pushing their politicians to bring that kind of infrastructure to them. In any case, there are always people on both sides, right? As in Kyoto, there was a very strong push to get it, but then of course there are people who are unhappy about it as well.
Okay. Moving along, thank you. Colin says he's really intrigued by how Japan managed this and the policy decisions that went alongside it, and asks, are there any big lessons that Japan has already learned that high-speed rail here in the USA could learn?
That is a question that American policymakers also asked. There was a strong interest in Japan just as the bullet train was being built and just after it started running. The United Nations sent a group of both politicians and engineers to spend a week examining the Tōkaidō line under construction in 1963. The United States government sent some experts from, I think it was from MIT in 1964, 65. President Johnson was talking about really boosting transportation infrastructure at that time, especially rail. And so there was a sense that we can learn from Japan. Representatives of New Jersey, the aforementioned New Jersey Transit, who went to Tokyo to examine the line under construction, wrote a report in which they said, literally, explicitly, we can learn a lot. Interestingly, what they most thought they could learn was the political strength to do it, right? They said the technology is not that much better than ours. We have the skills and the know-how. What the Japanese government did that was amazing was to just do it in spite of opposition, in spite of the incredible costs, that they had the foresight and political will to get this done. And there was a sense that that's not something that we can necessarily do, or that's something that we could learn from in our country. And I think recent efforts to build high-speed rail in the United States suggest that it's still something that the US could learn. I think on the other hand, Japan itself has learned some lessons in the other direction from their own past, which is, I briefly mentioned the Shizuoka governor. There's much more sensitivity to environmental impact now, right? Whereas in the past, people said, hey, this is going to be damaging, and JNR, Japanese National Railways, listened in the certain cases in which it was in their interests to listen, like right when they realized, oh, actually, that's not going to be good for the line. We want to go a different way anyway. They said, oh yeah, okay, we'll go a different way. But in other cases where they just needed to go through there, they just did it anyway. I think now the Shizuoka case shows that over the ensuing decades, there has been a lot more balance achieved between that desire for high-speed growth, for industrial growth and development at all costs, to the actual costs, right?
Okay.
So that's something that I think also we Americans should also keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. Let's do one more. There's a good concluding question here. It's the top of the hour. Siva asks, are there good books, documentaries, etc., on the impact of high-speed rail and the enormous growth associated with it? I'll just remind everyone that Professor Abel's book is called Dream Super Express, A Cultural History of the World's First Bullet Train. But are there any others?
Okay, yes, thanks. That's the one, the first one I would mention. There are a couple of other books that I would mention right off the bat. One of them is Takashi Nishiyama, I want to say. I'm just seeing if I have his book on my shelf here so I can remember the name of it. The book is really about sorry, the book is really about Japanese engineering, but there are at least 2 chapters that really focus in on the bullet train. And so that's a really good explanation about how technological transfer across the war into the post-war shaped the bullet train, and also how international technological transfer shaped the bullet train, as well as just engineering education in Japan. Another really sort of wide-ranging book that is jam-packed with all sorts of details and stories about all kinds of things is Christopher Hood's book. Again, where have all my bullet train? Oh, there it is. Shinkansen from bullet train to symbol of modern Japan, it's called. Those are 2, if we're, oh, here's the other book that I was thinking of. Okay, Takashi Nishiyama, Engineering, War and Peace in Modern Japan, and Christopher Hood, Shinkansen, from bullet train to symbol of modern Japan. Hood's book really gets more into contemporary times, and so he talks a little bit about the history, but really sort of what's the economic impact and the social impact, and how did they come up with the names of these various trains. So all sorts of things. It's really a lot of fascinating stories there. So if I were gonna list books in English about the train, those are probably the top 2 that come to mind.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, so maybe some of those books, give people, ways to pursue their interest.
Oh, wait, I just want to add one thing on documentaries. There is Japanese National Railways made a documentary, and I know it's floating around on the internet. I don't have a link to it handy, but I think it's just called Tōkaidō Shinkansen. I can maybe share a link to it with you later if people want to get that.
Okay.
And can you send us an email with those books you recommended, and then we can email them down to the people?
I sure will.
And put them on the summary.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who is here. I want to point out we dug through the prize closet, and there is one remaining Series O model. You can get these in department stores everywhere in Japan, but not here in the States. The first person who sends me an email at rick@hsrail.org and makes a donation, I will send that to them today. So that's rick@hsrail.org. I put it in the comments, and then make a donation at the donation field. So Jessamine, thank you again so much. This was so helpful. And if Roger is still on, Roger, thank you for bringing the book one day so that I read it and said, this is really cool. So we will meet again. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.